Hello, my dear friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Beatdowns with the Boz. So today I have for you a green-black aggro deck. Eric Froelich has done really well at the Pro Tour with this deck, as well as the subsequent events following it up, and it's had a really big splash all over Standard, particularly at the most recent Grand Prix in Providence. So the one thing that's interesting, though, is that for the most part, a lot of the people have taken the deck and made it bigger and more controlling. And the one thing that I find particularly interesting about that is that a bigger, slower game plan doesn't really facilitate cards like Smuggler's Copter and Grim Flayer. So I decided to try to take things in the opposite direction and go a lot faster. So we're going to be opening our curve with the Gnarlwood Dryad, a good, 1-mana creature that's always going to be able to trade with whatever our opponent plays. So as a 1-drop, it's going to trade up. And with Delirium, it's going to get, to Wild and the Coddle side. Grim Flayer, you've seen a lot of it. Just really good card. Really good with, Delirium as a payoff and an enabler. Smuggler's Copter, just one of the most dominant cards in Standard. Everyone likes it a little more than I do, but I certainly acknowledge that this card's just really good. Scrapheap Scrounger, this is a card that this deck doesn't usually play very many of. Eric Froelich has played them in the sideboard, but I decided to go with 4 in the main. It's a really aggressive play on turn 2 as a 3-power attacker. Gives defenders a bit of a problem because you can recur it from your graveyard. And it's a really good thing to discard a Smuggler's Copter because obviously you can get it back out of your graveyard, but in terms of Delirium, it's an artifact and a creature. The next 3-drop, or the next point up on the curve, I have 4 Tireless Trackers. This is just a pretty solid creature at 3 mana. It's not insane at 3 mana, but if it sits on the board, it starts getting a lot of value and it can take over a game. So I really like Tireless Tracker in particular as a curve topper. Mournwillow, or actually before I get to that, let's talk about Drana. Drana is a good way to just make it so that this deck can snowball, as well as the fact that just having a good flyer is quite valuable. The air battles become pretty important as the ground can frequently get locked up, and Drana can be just similar to Tireless Tracker in that it's a threat that can basically run away with the game if it's left uncontested. Mournwillow is a really interesting creature. It's fairly aggressive, a 3-power, 3-mana creature with haste, but the Delirium effect of making it so that creatures with power 2 or less can't block this turn is quite valuable because so often where you run into problems with an aggro deck is you're trying to attack your opponent. And if they're one of the aggressive decks, a lot of the white-based aggressive decks have these incidental 1/1s that sit around, whether they're Copter tokens from Pia, Nalar, or Thraben Inspectors. Mournwillow makes it so that none of those things can block. Also, the other thing that aggro decks tend to have a hard time with is Ishkana. All the 1/2 tokens end up being a really big problem. So Mournwillow gives you a good way to basically punch through the board stalls, and it's just pretty aggressive on its own, which is nice also. Blossoming Defense is a great card. It just protects your creatures. It's a really good tempo swing if you are able to trade it off with one of your opponent's 3-mana removal spells. And it's also just in general great with Grim Flayer because you play Grim Flayer, they block, you play Blossoming Defense, your Grim Flayer kills their guy and tramples over to still get his trigger. Grasp of Darkness is just the most efficient removal spell that has a wide variety of applications, so I've got all 4 of them. And then Traverse the Ulvenwald is just a nice way to make it so that our deck has a fair amount of consistency. It helps enable Delirium by putting a sorcery in the graveyard. And even though we're an aggro deck, a lot of our creatures can be top performers in specific situations. Like being able to traverse for Mournwillow when you need it to kill your opponent is quite nice. Or when the board's stalling out, getting a Tireless Tracker or a Drana can also be quite valuable. So that's the main deck. We're basically just looking to have few creatures to start out with, and then a few creatures that can either run away with the game or close the game out if left uncontested, and along with some, very efficient interaction. On the sideboard, we have some more removal in case we need it. Deadweights, Appetite for the Unnatural, and Murder can all come in against various creature decks. If we need to interact with our opponent's hand, like they're playing, the Aether Marvel deck, Pick the Brain, Transgress the Mind are great for that. And if we just need a little bit more attrition, then we have Liliana the Last Hope, great in a delirium strategy, and also Kalitas, which also helps us deal with any kind of prized amalgam decks that we may see, or opposing Scrapheap Scrounger decks. So that's the deck. It's pretty sweet. I like it quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to getting into some games now.